A man in a dark canvas jacket and jeans walks into a private bank in Beverly Hills on a Tuesday morning, takes a number from the dispenser by the door, and sits down in one of the 6 chairs arranged along the east wall to wait. He waits. He does not take out his phone. He does not speak to anyone. He holds the number, 47, and watches the room the way a person watches a room when they have time and are using it. When 47 is called, he stands, walks to window 3, and sets a single folded document on the counter. The woman behind the window looks at the document. She looks at the jacket, the jeans, the canvas bag over his shoulder that has been on more than a few trips. She looks at the document again. Then she looks at the clock on the wall above window 4. "I'm sorry," she says. "I'm actually closing for my break in about 2 minutes. Window 2 should be able to help you." She pulls the shade. The shade comes down in the particular way of shades that have been pulled many times, smoothly, without hesitation. The practiced motion of someone who has made this decision before and has a system for it. The man at window 3 looks at the shade. He picks up the document. He walks to window 2. The associate at window 2 is 23 years old and has been at Meridian Private Bank for 4 months and has never seen a shade pulled on a customer with a document like the one this man is holding. She will think about this moment for the rest of her career. What she does next, what she sees, what she does with what she sees, and what the lobby of Meridian Private Bank on South Santa Monica Boulevard looks like 6 months later, is a story about the specific geometry of a mistake made in a room full of money, and what it costs to pretend it didn't happen. There is a private bank on South Santa Monica Boulevard in Beverly Hills called Meridian Private. It occupies the ground floor of a building that went up in 1987 and has not significantly changed since, which is a deliberate choice. In a neighborhood where renovation signals relevance, Meridian Private has decided that stability signals something more useful. The marble in the lobby is the original marble. The paneling behind the teller windows is the same dark walnut it has always been. The carpet, which runs through the waiting area and the offices off the main floor, is a deep charcoal gray that looks expensive because it is, and that is replaced every 6 years on a schedule the building manager maintains. The bank serves private clients, not exclusively wealthy clients, though the minimum deposit to open a Meridian Private account is $500,000, which narrows the pool considerably. But specifically the kind of client for whom a bank is not simply a place to deposit money, but a relationship. Meridian Private employs 12 relationship managers whose entire professional function is to know their assigned clients well enough to anticipate needs before they are stated. They know when clients are traveling. They know when significant transactions are likely. They know birthdays and preferred forms of address, and in several long-standing cases, the names of grandchildren. The teller windows, there are 4. Though rarely more than 2 are staffed at any given time, because Meridian Private's volume does not require 4, are staffed by associates who have been trained in the specific register of the institution. Warm without being familiar, efficient without being brisk, attentive in the way that private banking requires, which is a different quality of attention from the attention of a retail bank. At Meridian Private, you are expected to know, before a client stands in front of you, that they are not a stranger. The man who walked in on a Tuesday morning in March was, in fact, not a stranger. He had held an account at Meridian Private for 7 years. His relationship manager was a woman named Diana Park, who had managed his account for the last 4 of those years and who was on a flight to New York that morning for a client meeting that had been scheduled 6 weeks in advance. His account balance, as of the previous Friday's statement, was $5,247,000. He had come in without calling ahead, which was unusual for him. Diana had noted in his file that he almost always gave advance notice, because the errand was simple. He needed to transfer $180,000 to a production company account in connection with a project he was involved in, and the transfer required a wet signature on a specific form, which could not be done online, which was why he was at the window rather than at his laptop. The form was the folded document. The teller at window 3 had not looked at the form long enough to read it. She had looked at the jacket and the jeans and made the call she made several times a week, in one version or another, without examining the decision closely enough to see what it was built on. She pulled the shade. Her name was Gail Morrow, and she had worked at Meridian Private for 11 years, which made her the most experienced teller on staff, more experienced in institutional terms than either of the associate relationship managers and 2 of the full relationship managers. She had been at the window through 3 management changes and 1 significant renovation of the back offices and the particular financial crisis of 2008, which had passed through Meridian Private in a way that was different from how it passed through retail banks, more quietly, with more behind-closed-doors conversations, but with its own kind of fear. And she had stayed through all of it. She was 54 years old. She wore her hair back in a bun she had maintained since her early 30s because it was efficient, and she had stopped reconsidering it. She had a quality of contained precision at the window that new staff were told to observe. The way she handled documents, the way she recorded transactions, the way she communicated with clients in the exact register the institution required. She was good at what she did. What she was also was a person who had spent 11 years in a room full of significant money without being fully certain, in the place where certainty gets tested, that she belonged in it. She had grown up in Inglewood, 12 miles from Beverly Hills, in a house where money was present enough to handle necessities and absent enough to be a source of ongoing tension. Her father had worked 31 years for the city, Parks Department, then Public Works, and her mother had kept the books for a small insurance agency and brought that precision home with her, which was where Gail had learned it. They had not been poor. They had been the specific degree of not poor that is also not comfortable, which has its own particular anxiety. The anxiety of knowing that the margin between your current situation and a much harder one is not as wide as it looks. She had gotten the job at Meridian Private at 43, after a decade at a retail bank in Hawthorne. And the first thing she had noticed, the thing that had taken her 6 months to process, was the distance between where she had come from and where she now stood every weekday from 9 to 5. The clients who came through Meridian Private's door were not simply wealthier than the clients at the Hawthorne branch. They moved differently. They spoke in a register she had to calibrate to. They had a quality of ease in the presence of significant money that was the specific ease of people who had grown up with it rather than arrived at it. She had arrived at it as an employee. That distinction, present every day in the marble lobby, in the walnut paneling, in the $500,000 minimum that separated the clients from the staff who served them, was the thing she had never fully made peace with, and that had shaped, without her naming it to herself, the way she used the shade. The shade was supposed to be for breaks. 15 minutes, mid-morning, mid-afternoon. She used it the way she used it, which was more precisely as a tool for managing the ones she was less sure about. Not the clients she knew, not the clients who arrived the right way, with the right signals, with the particular ease that communicated belonging before they opened their mouths. The ones who came in from the street, looking like the street, holding documents she had not been prepared for. It was not a rule. It was a practice. She had never stated it to herself as a practice. It simply was. She had been doing it for 4 years. It had never cost her anything she could see. until the Tuesday morning in March. The associate at window 2 was named Jordan Ellis, 23 years old, 4 months at Meridian Private, and on the Tuesday morning in question had been at her window since 9 o'clock and had processed 3 transactions without incident and was working through the notes on the 4th client's file when the man with the canvas bag walked up to her window. She said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" He set the document on the counter. He said his name and his account number, which Jordan entered into the system. She looked at the screen. She looked at the document. She looked at the man. She said, "Of course, Mr. Reeves. Let me pull up your account." She said it in the even register of her training, which was correct. What was underneath the register was something else. The specific sensation of a person who has just seen 2 things simultaneously and is processing what they mean together, the account number, and the way the shade had just come down at window 3. She processed the transfer. She did it correctly and completely, and without any indication that she was holding anything other than professional attention. When the transaction was complete, she slid the confirmation copy across the counter. He thanked her by name. She watched him pick up the document and the confirmation copy and put them both carefully into the canvas bag. She said, "Mr. Reeves, is there anything else I can do for you today?" He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "You did everything right." He said it simply, directly, the way a person says a thing that is both a compliment and a precise observation, and that the person receiving it would think about for a long time. He picked up the bag and walked across the marble lobby and out through the front door. Jordan watched him go. She looked at window 3. The shade was still down. She went back to her screen. She did not say anything to anyone that day. She thought about it on the train home that evening and most of the following morning and decided by 10 o'clock on Wednesday that she was going to say something. Not because she had been instructed to, because she had spent 4 months learning what the window was supposed to be, and what she had watched happen at window 3 was not it. And she was 23 years old and was not yet fully certain what the right move was, but was certain enough to make it. She asked to speak to the branch manager. The branch manager was a man named Robert Cahill, 58 years old, 17 years at Meridian Private, the last 9 as branch manager. He was a man of specific procedures, not rigid but precise, which was a distinction he considered important and maintained by example. He ran a quiet operation. The branch had not had a formal client complaint in 2 years and 4 months, which was a number he knew because he tracked it. He listened to Jordan for 11 minutes without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You're telling me Gail pulled the shade on a client who was mid-transaction?" He had walked up to the window, Jordan said. He hadn't stated his business yet. But he had a document. What document? She described it. Robert was quiet for a moment. "And the client," he said. "Did he say anything to you or to anyone?" "He said I did everything right," Jordan said. "That was all." Robert looked at her for a moment. "Thank you for telling me," he said. He pulled the transaction log for Tuesday. He found the transfer, $180,000, account of K. Reeves, processed by J. Ellis at window 2 at 10:23 a.m. He noted the timestamp against the teller activity log for window 3, which showed Gail's break beginning at 10:19 a.m., 4 minutes before the transaction completed. He sat with the log for a while. Then, he called Diana Park in New York. Diana Park was Keanu Reeves' relationship manager, and she was in a meeting when Robert called, and she stepped out of the meeting because she recognized the branch number, and calls from the branch during client meetings at external locations did not happen without a reason. Robert told her what Jordan had told him. Diana was quiet for 4 seconds. He didn't say anything? She said. He thanked Jordan by name and said she had done everything right. Another pause. That's him, she said. Robert said, I'm going to need to speak with Gail. I know, Diana said. Robert, when you do, make sure you understand what you're looking at before you decide what it is. Robert said he understood. He did not, at that point, fully understand. He understood it better 2 days later, when he sat across from Gail Morrow in his office and listened to her for 40 minutes, and came away from the conversation with the specific knowledge that the problem was not a teller pulling a shade on a client. The problem was something older than that, and it had been in the branch for 4 years, and he had not seen it because it had not produced a complaint, and the things that don't produce complaints are not always the things that aren't costing you anything. He told Gail what he knew. He told her the account number, the balance, the name. Gail Morrow sat across from him and was very still for a moment. I didn't read the form, she said. No, I didn't ask his name. No. She was quiet. I've done this before, she said. It was not a question. I think you have, Robert said. I don't know how many times I should have been looking. She said, it's not your fault. Some of it is, he said. You've been here 11 years. We talk about the client relationship constantly. I don't know that we've ever talked about what makes someone look before they get to the window like they belong. She looked at her hands. I know where it comes from, she said. He waited. She told him. Not everything. Not the Inglewood house. Not the 31 years of city work. Not the specific calculation of a margin that was never quite wide enough. But the shape of it. 11 years on the other side of a window from people who had never had to think about which side of the window they were on, and what that had quietly done to the way she used the shade. Robert listened. When she finished, he said, What do you want to do about it? She thought about it for a long moment. I want to call Diana, she said, and ask her to tell him I'm sorry. You can do that, he said. Diana would arrange that. I want to say it myself, Gail said. Not through Diana. Robert looked at her. I'll ask, he said. He asked. The answer came back through Diana 2 days later. Yes. The call lasted 9 minutes. Gail had written down what she wanted to say and then put the paper away because reading from it felt like the wrong kind of prepared. She told him she was sorry. She told him she had done it without reading the form and without asking his name and without extending to him the same assumption of purpose she gave every client who arrived at her window, knowing what her 3-second read was going to tell her about them. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, I appreciate you calling. She said, I don't know how many times I've done that. I should. He said, I think you know now. She said, yes. A pause. He said, can I ask you something? Yes, the break. Is it always at 10:19? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. He said, I know. It was not a rebuke. It was just a true thing, said simply, the way he said things that were simply true. She said, I'm going to fix it. He said, I know that too. He thanked her for calling. He said Diana was one of the best relationship managers he had encountered, and he meant it as what it was, a compliment to the branch, not a coda to the apology. Then he said goodbye. She sat at her desk for a while after the call. She thought about the form she had not read, the name she had not asked. The 4 years of shades pulled at 10:19 on the wrong mornings. Then she went back to the window. Gail Morrow worked at Meridian Private for 4 more years after the Tuesday in March. She did not pull the shade on a client again. Not because she was being watched, Robert Cahill had made clear the conversation was closed, and not a matter of formal record, but because the thing that had been invisible to her for 4 years was now visible, and visible things operate differently than invisible ones. You cannot unsee something you have finally seen. What changed, specifically, was not a practice, but a habit. Where before she had looked up from the window and done the 3-second read before the client reached her, the jacket, the bag, the ease or absence of it, she started looking up later. At the document first, at the name on the account, at the stated purpose of the transaction. The read still happened. It just happened in a different order, which meant it arrived after information, rather than instead of it. Robert Cahill noticed. He did not say so for 6 months, and then he mentioned it to Diana Park in passing during a quarterly review, and Diana noted it in a file she kept of the things that were going well, which was a file she had started 3 years earlier, and that had become, over time, a more useful document than the one tracking problems. Jordan Ellis was promoted to Junior Relationship Manager 14 months after the Tuesday in March. She was the youngest person to hold that title at the Beverly Hills branch in its history, which Robert mentioned at the small staff event he held to mark the occasion, and which Jordan received with the particular composure of someone who had learned early that the right move is not always the obvious move, and that saying something when you are 23 and uncertain is harder than it looks, and worth doing anyway. She managed 12 client accounts in her first year as a relationship manager. Her client retention at the 12-month mark was 100%, which was a number Robert also tracked and also noted. She attributed none of this, in any formal context, to a Tuesday morning in March. It was not a story she told. It was something she had absorbed and carried forward in the way that formative things are absorbed and carried forward, not as a narrative but as a quality, present in everything, traceable to a specific moment only if you knew where to look. Diana Park made a note in Keanu Reeves' file the day after she spoke to Robert Cahill. It was not a formal note, not the kind that appeared in the client relationship record or the transaction log. It was a personal note, in the margin of the yellow legal pad she kept for the things she did not want to put in the system. It said, KR, went to window 2. Thanked Jordan by name. Said she did everything right. Did not mention window 3. She kept the legal pad for another 3 years, until she moved to a different role at a different institution, at which point she took it with her, which was against policy, and which she did anyway because some records are worth keeping regardless of where the desk is. She thought about the note on the legal pad more than once in the years that followed. She thought about what it meant that a man with $5,247,000 in his account had stood at a closed window and walked quietly to the next one and conducted his business and gone back out into the morning, and had said nothing to anyone about the shade except to confirm, to the person who had done it correctly, that she had done it correctly. She had worked in private banking for 19 years. She had not seen that before. She was not sure she would see it again. I have been trying to find the right word for what Gail Morrow did at window 3, and the right word is not what I first reached for. The first word I reached for was arrogance. But that is not quite right, because arrogance requires a kind of confidence that Gail's story does not contain. What it contains is something closer to the opposite, the specific defensiveness of a person who spent a long time on the outside of something and arrived at the inside, still carrying the map of the outside, and who used that map to manage a door she had once been kept from herself. The word I keep arriving at is projection, not in the clinical sense. In the simpler sense of a person placing onto a stranger the experience of what it meant, once, to not have enough, and using that placement as the basis of a decision that closed a window on someone who had more than enough. because the person behind the decision had not yet separated what she had felt from what the stranger in front of her was. That is a very human error. I do not say that to excuse it. I say it because understanding it is the only thing that makes it correctable, which is what Gail understood when she picked up the phone. What I keep coming back to is window 2, not the shade, the window that stayed open. The 23-year-old who processed the transfer correctly and registered what she had seen and said something about it 2 days later, when she had had time to think it through and had decided it mattered enough to say. Jordan Ellis did not know, when she knocked on Robert Cahill's door, what was going to happen as a result. She did not know about Gail's history or the 9-minute phone call or the legal pad. She knew only what she had seen and that it was worth naming. That is the smaller act in this story. It is also, in many ways, the more ordinary one, the one that does not require a famous name or a significant account balance or any particular grace. It requires only a person paying attention and deciding that what they noticed is worth saying out loud. Most of us have a window 2 moment available to us. Most of us sit with it for a day or two and decide, for a reason we cannot fully articulate, that it is not quite our business. Jordan decided it was. That is the thing I keep coming back to. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for the kind of composure that does not require a grievance to define what comes next. If something in this one stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me what you took from it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. See you in the next one.